You think you know about the Vietnam War. You've seen the movies, heard the stories, maybe even had family who served. But what if I told you that everything you learned in school about the Vietnam War was carefully edited? What if the real reasons behind the Vietnam War were so shocking, so deeply connected to ancient prophecies and hidden knowledge, that the government had to bury the truth? This isn't just another war story. This is about why 58,000 Americans and over 3 million Vietnamese really died, and the terrifying discovery that changed everything we thought we knew about the Vietnam War. Welcome to an investigation that will shatter your understanding of the Vietnam War. Tonight, we're diving into classified documents, ancient texts, and testimonies that reveal the Vietnam War wasn't just about communism versus democracy. What really triggered the Vietnam War? Why did multiple civilizations predict a great conflict in Southeast Asia thousands of years ago? Is it possible that the Vietnam War was actually a race to control something far more valuable than political ideology? This is exclusive research about the Vietnam War that has been systematically hidden from public knowledge. Research that connects the Vietnam War to discoveries so profound, they threatened to rewrite human history itself. In 1962, a French archaeologist named Dr. Marcel Rousseau was conducting excavations near the Mekong Delta when he made a discovery that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Rousseau had spent decades studying ancient Khmer texts, but what he found buried beneath a temple complex would connect directly to the Vietnam War in ways nobody could have imagined. Rousseau was no ordinary scholar. He'd been expelled from the Sorbonne for his controversial theories about prehistoric civilizations in Southeast Asia. His colleagues mocked him for suggesting that Vietnam held secrets dating back 12,000 years. But Rousseau believed the Vietnam War wasn't the first great conflict to ravage this land. He claimed to have found evidence of an ancient war fought with weapons we couldn't comprehend, and that the modern Vietnam War was following a pattern written in stone millennia ago. When Rousseau tried to publish his findings about the Vietnam War's true origins, he was silenced. His research was confiscated. He died under mysterious circumstances in Saigon, just as American involvement in the Vietnam War was escalating. But his assistant smuggled out his notes that revealed why the Vietnam War had to happen exactly where it did. According to Rousseau's translations of ancient texts, the land we now call Vietnam was once home to the Keepers of the First Light, a mysterious civilization that possessed knowledge of energy manipulation and consciousness alteration. These texts, predating the Vietnam War by thousands of years, described a time of great burning when eagles from across the water would clash with dragons of the earth. The Vietnam War, Rousseau believed, was not random. The ancient texts spoke of specific locations, coordinates that matched exactly where the heaviest fighting of the Vietnam War would occur decades later. Places like the A Shau Valley, Khe Sanh, and the Iron Triangle weren't just strategic military positions in the Vietnam War. They were sacred sites, power points on an ancient grid. But here's where it gets strange. Multiple ancient civilizations, the Khmer, the Cham, even Chinese texts from the Han Dynasty, all referenced the same prophecy about the Vietnam War region. They called it the Return of the Skyfire, a time when humanity would either ascend or destroy itself. And they all pointed to the same geographic area where the Vietnam War would unfold. The French had stumbled upon some of these sites during their colonial period. The Japanese searched frantically for them during World War II. But it wasn't until the Vietnam War that a full-scale operation to control these locations began. Rousseau's notes revealed that both the Americans and the North Vietnamese were aware of something hidden in the jungles, something that made the Vietnam War about far more than political ideology. The evidence connecting the Vietnam War to ancient mysteries is overwhelming when you know where to look. First, there's the archaeological evidence. In 1968, during the height of the Vietnam War, American forces discovered a vast tunnel complex near Cu Chi that predated the Vietnam War by centuries. But these weren't ordinary tunnels. They were carved with precision that shouldn't have been possible with ancient tools, featuring acoustic properties that allowed whispers to travel for miles. The Viet Cong didn't build these during the Vietnam War. They found them and expanded them. Then there's the linguistic evidence. The word Vietnam itself contains ancient roots. Viet derives from the Bayou people, but deeper etymology traces it to words meaning transcendent or beyond. Nam means south, But in ancient texts, it also meant gateway. The Vietnam War was literally fought in the Southern Gateway of Transcendence. Consider the physical anomalies documented during the Vietnam War. Pilots reported compass malfunctions over specific areas. Soldiers described experiencing time distortions in certain valleys. The military attributed these to stress and jungle conditions. But declassified Vietnam War documents reveal the Pentagon sent specialized teams to investigate electromagnetic anomalies in these exact locations. The spiritual evidence is equally compelling. Buddhist monks who fled during the Vietnam War spoke of ancient meditation sites that had been used for thousands of years to achieve elevated consciousness. These sites formed a pattern, a geometric grid across Vietnam. Every major battle of the Vietnam War occurred at or near these points. Coincidence? Or did both sides know something we didn't? Perhaps most disturbing is the biological evidence. Medical reports from the Vietnam War describe soldiers experiencing unexplained cellular changes after exposure to certain areas, not from Agent Orange or other chemicals, but from simply being present in specific locations. DNA samples showed markers that geneticists couldn't explain, markers that suggested exposure to energy fields unknown to modern science. But critics weren't convinced by these connections to the Vietnam War. Mainstream historians dismissed Rousseau's work as fantasy, pointing out that the Vietnam War had clear political causes. The domino theory, Cold War tensions, nationalist movements, they argued that any mysterious elements were simply the fog of war, that the Vietnam War was exactly what it appeared to be, a proxy conflict between superpowers. Scientists pointed to logical explanations for the anomalies reported during the Vietnam War. Electromagnetic disturbances could be caused by mineral deposits. Time distortion experiences were likely due to combat stress and jungle hallucinogens. The ancient tunnels? Simply impressive engineering by earlier civilizations, co-opted during the Vietnam War for practical purposes. Military officials who served in the Vietnam War scoffed at suggestions of hidden agendas. "We were there to stop communism," one general stated. There were no ancient artifacts, no mysterious energies. The Vietnam War was about protecting democracy, period. But what if the skeptics were wrong? There was one thing they didn't count on: the testimony of those who were there during the Vietnam War and saw things that were never reported. In 2010, former CIA operative James Blackwood broke his 40-year silence about his role in the Vietnam War. He revealed the existence of Operation Gateway, a classified program that ran parallel to the public Vietnam War effort. While soldiers fought on the surface, specialized teams searched for what Blackwood called pre-diluvian technology. The Vietnam War was a cover, Blackwood stated in his final interview. Yes, we were fighting communism, but that was secondary. Both sides were racing to control sites of immense power, sites that contained evidence of a civilization that existed before the last ice age. Blackwood's claims about the Vietnam War were supported by leaked documents showing unusual military deployments. Why did the U.S. spend millions defending hills with no strategic value? Why did North Vietnamese forces fight desperately for jungle locations that offered no tactical advantage? The conventional Vietnam War narrative couldn't explain these decisions. But if both sides were seeking something else entirely, this is where the Vietnam War story takes its most incredible turn. According to multiple whistleblowers, what they found in those jungle sites wasn't just ancient technology. It was evidence of non-human intelligence. The beings described in the ancient text as keepers of the first light weren't metaphorical. They were literal descriptions of entities that had interacted with early humans in Southeast Asia. The Vietnam War, some insiders claim, was triggered when both superpowers realized these beings might have left behind more than just ruins. Soldiers reported encountering craft that didn't match any known aircraft during the Vietnam War. Not just UFO sightings, but physical evidence, landing sites with glass-fused soil, radiation signatures that didn't match any known weapons, and most disturbing, underground chambers containing what appeared to be preservation pods. One Marine who served in the Vietnam War described finding a cave system in 1969. Inside were these containers, like giant eggs made of some material we couldn't identify. The brass went crazy when we reported it. Within hours, the area was sealed off. They told us we never saw anything, that it never happened. But I know what I saw during the Vietnam War. The implications were staggering. Had ancient visitors chosen Southeast Asia as a base? Were the conflicts throughout history, culminating in the Vietnam War, actually attempts to control their legacy? And most terrifying, were some of these visitors still there, dormant, waiting? The Vietnam War's connection to ancient mysteries becomes even more compelling when we examine parallel myths from around the world. The Sumerian texts speak of the Anunnaki establishing bases in the land of the rising dragon. A clear reference to Southeast Asia, Hindu scriptures describe vimanas, flying vehicles, engaging in aerial battles over the exact region where the Vietnam War was fought. The Mayan calendar, which tracks cosmic cycles with stunning accuracy, marks the period of the Vietnam War as a critical junction point. They called it the time of choosing, when humanity would face a test that would determine its evolution or devolution. The Dresden Codex specifically mentions warriors from the eagle and the dragon, clashing in the southern lands of the ancient power, Chinese. Legends from the Shang dynasty describe the Dragon Kings, who ruled from underground cities in what is now Vietnam. These beings possessed the power to control weather, move through dimensions, and alter human consciousness. Every culture that interacted with this region before the Vietnam War reported similar phenomena. Even more intriguing, Aboriginal Australian Dreamtime stories speak of the sky heroes who traveled north to establish sanctuaries in Southeast Asia. Their oral traditions, maintained for 40,000 years, describe a great conflict that would occur when the children forgot their origins, a clear prophecy of the Vietnam War. But why did these ancient civilizations disappear? What cataclysm ended their reign and left only traces for us to discover during the Vietnam War? The texts are consistent. A great burning from the sky, floods that swallowed entire cities, and the earth itself convulsing in agony. The survivors scattered, their knowledge fragmented, their technology lost. But they left warnings, encoded in monuments and myths, about the cycles of destruction and the importance of the sacred sites. The Vietnam War, according to this narrative, was humanity unconsciously drawn back to these power points at a crucial time in our evolution. The violence and destruction of the Vietnam War may have been a pale echo of the ancient cataclysm, played out by modern nations who didn't fully understand what they were fighting for. Imagine the tragedy. Millions died in the Vietnam War, not knowing they were pawns in a game that started before recorded history. The jungle consumed soldiers who never realized they were walking through the ruins of a civilization that had conquered death itself before falling to its own hubris. Modern science, of course, dismisses these connections to the Vietnam War. Geologists find no evidence of advanced ancient civilizations in Southeast Asia. Archaeologists point out that the tunnels, while impressive, show tool marks consistent with Iron Age technology. The Vietnam War, they insist, was purely a 20th century political conflict with no connection to ancient mysteries. Linguists argue that the prophetic texts are being misinterpreted. The references to the Vietnam War are retrofitted modern interpretations of vague ancient poetry. Historians emphasize the well-documented political causes of the Vietnam War: French colonialism, nationalist movements, Cold War paranoia. No ancient aliens or lost civilizations required. But if this is all fantasy, why do so many cultures say the same thing? Why do their prophecies align so precisely with the Vietnam War? Why did both superpowers spend enormous resources on archaeological teams during the Vietnam War, missions that remain classified to this day? Perhaps the truth about the Vietnam War lies somewhere between the extremes. Consider the possibility that Southeast Asia was indeed home to an advanced ancient civilization, not aliens, but humans who achieved a different kind of technology, one based on consciousness and energy rather than machinery. The Vietnam War may have been unconsciously influenced by the psychic residue of these ancient sites. The extreme violence and psychological trauma of the Vietnam War could have been amplified by the energy fields of these locations, creating a feedback loop of destruction that neither side could control. Some researchers suggest that the ancient technology sought during the Vietnam War was actually knowledge, meditation techniques, consciousness-altering practices, ways of perceiving reality that modern humans have forgotten. The Vietnam War represented a clash between ancient wisdom and modern mechanistic thinking, with tragic results. Or perhaps the sites were important for more tangible reasons. Rare earth minerals, unique magnetic properties, or other natural resources that ancient civilizations recognized as valuable. The Vietnam War could have been a resource war disguised as an ideological conflict, with both sides dimly aware they were fighting for something more than political control. What if your DNA carries traces of the ancient civilizations that once ruled Southeast Asia? Studies have shown that people of Southeast Asian descent, including many Vietnam War veterans and their descendants, carry unique genetic markers not found elsewhere. Could the Vietnam War have been a gathering of souls with ancient connections to this land? Do you really know why your grandfather, father, uncle, or brother was sent to fight in the Vietnam War? Were they just soldiers in a political conflict? Or were they unconscious participants in a drama that began before human history? Could the trauma of the Vietnam War have awakened dormant memories in our collective DNA? The Vietnam War changed everyone it touched. Veterans returned with more than PTSD. Many reported profound spiritual experiences, psychic abilities, and connections to something greater than themselves. Was this just the result of extreme stress? Or did the Vietnam War expose them to energies and knowledge that transformed them at a cellular level? The Vietnam War ended in 1975, but its mysteries remain. Somewhere in the jungles of Southeast Asia, the ancient sites still exist. The tunnels still whisper their secrets. The energy fields still pulse with power we don't understand. And perhaps, in hidden chambers not yet discovered, evidence waits that could finally reveal why the Vietnam War had to happen exactly where and when it did. What do you believe about the Vietnam War? Was it simply a Cold War proxy conflict? Or was it the latest chapter in a story that began before human civilization? Are the connections to ancient prophecies and lost technologies just coincidence, or evidence of a hidden history that powerful forces don't want us to know? Share your thoughts, your theories, your own strange experiences connected to the Vietnam War. Because if we don't uncover the truth about the Vietnam War, we may be doomed to repeat it, not just the political conflict, but the cosmic drama that has played out in Southeast Asia for millennia. The Vietnam War may be over, but the mystery has just begun. And the answer might change everything you thought you knew about human history, your own origins, and what's coming next. What if the Vietnam War was never really about what they told us? What if it's not really over? What do you believe? In 1995, 20 years after the Vietnam War ended, something extraordinary happened. The Vietnamese government briefly opened archives that had been sealed since the fall of Saigon. Western researchers had exactly 72 hours to examine documents before they were mysteriously resealed. What they found in those archives about the Vietnam War defied all conventional understanding. Among the papers were reports from North Vietnamese units describing encounters during the Vietnam War that were never reported to Moscow or Beijing. Entire platoons vanishing in areas with no enemy presence, soldiers emerging from certain valleys aged years in mere days, and most disturbing, detailed sketches of underground chambers containing technology that no one could identify. Dr. Sarah Chen, one of the few researchers who saw these Vietnam War documents, later testified, "The North Vietnamese were just as confused as we were. They thought the Americans had secret weapons, but the reports made it clear, whatever they were encountering during the Vietnam War, it wasn't from either side." The archives contained maps marking forbidden zones throughout the Vietnam War theater. These weren't military exclusion zones. They were areas where both sides unofficially agreed not to enter. Veterans from both armies later confirmed these unspoken truces during the Vietnam War. There were places in the jungle where the war stopped, one former NVA officer revealed. Places older than the revolution, older than colonialism, places where the Vietnam War dared not go. Everyone knows about the Phoenix program during the Vietnam War, the controversial CIA operation aimed at neutralizing Viet Cong infrastructure. But declassified documents reveal Phoenix had a secret division that had nothing to do with counterinsurgency. This division of the Vietnam War operation was searching for something else entirely, codenamed Oracle. This branch of Phoenix deployed teams of archaeologists, linguists, and what one document mysteriously calls consciousness specialists throughout the Vietnam War zone. Their mission parameters remain mostly classified, but leaked fragments paint a disturbing picture of the Vietnam War's hidden agenda. Oracle teams during the Vietnam War were equipped with technology that didn't officially exist. ground-penetrating radar systems decades ahead of their time, electromagnetic field detectors, and devices that measured what reports called psychic resonance. They weren't hunting Viet Cong. During the Vietnam War, they were mapping ancient sites and recovering artifacts. One Oracle operative who served during the Vietnam War later revealed, "We'd helicopter into areas with no strategic value, places where no battles of the Vietnam War were being fought. We'd find stone structures covered by jungle, always built according to specific geometric patterns." The brass was obsessed with these sites. They'd risk entire teams during the Vietnam War to recover even fragments of carved stone. But what were they finding? Reports from the Vietnam War describe crystalline matrices that stored information, metal alloys that didn't match any known element, and most bizarrely, organic computers that responded to human thought. Every discovery during the Vietnam War was immediately shipped to facilities in Nevada and Antarctica, facilities that officially didn't exist. The indigenous Montagnard people of the Central Highlands held crucial knowledge about the Vietnam War that both sides initially ignored. These tribes, who had inhabited the region for thousands of years, possessed oral traditions that predicted the Vietnam War with chilling accuracy. According to Montagnard elders, their ancestors were instructed by the sky teachers to guard certain locations until the time of the Great Burning. They were told that one day, eagles and dragons would fight over the sacred grounds, and that this conflict, clearly the Vietnam War, would determine humanity's future. The Montagnards identified specific mountains and valleys as doors between worlds. They warned both American and North Vietnamese forces during the Vietnam War to avoid these areas, claiming that disturbing them would wake the sleeping gods. Most military commanders dismissed these warnings during the Vietnam War as primitive superstition. Those who listened often survived longer. Y Bum, a Montagnard shaman who lived through the Vietnam War, later testified, "The Vietnam War was written in the stars long ago. Our people were told to wait, to watch, to remember. The Americans and Vietnamese thought they were fighting for politics, but the old gods were using the Vietnam War to test humanity. The real battle was not between nations, but between those who would keep humanity enslaved and those who would set it free." While American involvement in the Vietnam War's mysteries is well documented by whistleblowers, the Soviet role remained hidden until recently. In 2018, former KGB archives revealed that the USSR had its own paranormal research division operating during the Vietnam War. Codenamed Vostok 7, Soviet psychic researchers were embedded with North Vietnamese forces throughout the Vietnam War. Their mission? To investigate the same anomalies the Americans were studying, and to weaponize any discoveries. The Soviets had learned from captured Nazi documents about the power points of Southeast Asia and were determined not to let the Americans control them during the Vietnam War. Colonel Viktor Volkov, who led Vostok 7 during the Vietnam War, defected in 1991 with explosive information. "The Vietnam War was a race," he revealed, "not for territory but for artifacts and knowledge. We found things in those jungles that challenged everything we believed about reality. Moscow was terrified that the Americans would decode the secrets first." The Soviets documented numerous impossible events during the Vietnam War. North Vietnamese soldiers who developed telepathic abilities after exposure to certain caves, ancient stones that emitted measurable energy fields, and underground water systems that seemed to enhance human consciousness. Every discovery during the Vietnam War was reported directly to a secret committee in the Kremlin. The Vietnam War's expansion into Cambodia wasn't just about pursuing enemy forces. Declassified intelligence reveals that both sides were racing to reach Angkor Wat and other ancient Khmer sites before their opponents. The Vietnam War had awakened interest in connections between these temples and the mysterious sites in Vietnam. French researchers studying Angkor Wat before the Vietnam War had discovered that the temple complex was built according to astronomical alignments that matched sites in Vietnam. The entire region formed a vast geometric pattern, a pattern that became a strategic map during the Vietnam War. Dr. James Morrison, who analyzed satellite imagery from the Vietnam War era, made a shocking discovery. The major battles of the Vietnam War occurred at precise points that completed ancient geometric patterns. It's as if the war itself was a ritual, unconsciously enacted by modern armies who didn't understand what they were doing. The bombing of Cambodia during the Vietnam War targeted not just supply lines, but specific archaeological sites. B-52 strikes were ordered on coordinates that held no military value, unless you understood what lay beneath the jungle. The Vietnam War had become a desperate race to control or destroy ancient knowledge. The CIA's recruitment of Hmong fighters during the Vietnam War had a deeper purpose than creating an anti-communist force. The Hmong possessed shamanic traditions that allowed them to navigate the anomalous zones where conventional forces became disoriented. Their involvement in the Vietnam War was directly related to their ability to access the ancient sites, Chmang. Shamans spoke of the dragon lines, energy pathways that crisscrossed Southeast Asia. They claimed the Vietnam War was disturbing these lines, causing reality itself to become unstable. Their traditional practices, refined over millennia, allowed them to move through areas where other soldiers during the Vietnam War experienced temporal distortions and psychological breaks. General Vang Pao, who led Hmong forces during the Vietnam War, later revealed, "My people always knew the mountains held secrets. The Americans came looking for these secrets during the Vietnam War. They promised us weapons and support, but what they really wanted was our knowledge of the forbidden places." The Hmong guided special operations teams during the Vietnam War to sites that didn't appear on any map. These locations, hidden for centuries, contained evidence of the advanced civilization that had once ruled the region. Every artifact recovered during the Vietnam War deepened the mystery of who had built these structures and why. Australia's participation in the Vietnam War included a classified unit that officially didn't exist. The Special Archaeological Recovery Team, SART, was comprised of Aboriginal trackers, archaeologists, and what documents describe as consciousness researchers. Their involvement in the Vietnam War was kept secret even from Australia's own government. Aboriginal elders had warned that the Vietnam War would wake the sleeping serpent, a reference to the energy lines their culture had mapped for 40,000 years. These lines, they claimed, connected Australia to Southeast Asia in ways Western science couldn't comprehend. The Vietnam War was disturbing a balance maintained since the Dreamtime. SART teams during the Vietnam War reported finding cave paintings in Vietnam identical to those in Australia, despite no known historical connection. The images depicted beings descending from the sky, teaching humans about energy manipulation and consciousness expansion. The Vietnam War had uncovered evidence of a global prehistoric civilization. Military hospitals during the Vietnam War documented medical cases that defied explanation. Soldiers exposed to certain areas developed new neural pathways, enhanced sensory perception, and in some cases, apparent psychic abilities. The Vietnam War was changing people at a fundamental level. Dr. Robert Sterling, who treated veterans of the Vietnam War, testified before a closed Senate committee. "We saw genetic changes that shouldn't have been possible. Men who served in specific areas of the Vietnam War came back with altered DNA, not damaged, evolved, as if they'd been exposed to an evolutionary accelerant." The VA hospitals treating Vietnam War veterans noticed patterns. Those who served in certain valleys reported identical visions, ancient cities, beings of light, technologies beyond imagination. The psychiatrists initially diagnosed mass hallucinations caused by combat stress. But when veterans who had never met described identical visions from the Vietnam War, a darker possibility emerged. Blood samples from Vietnam War veterans showed unique antibodies that didn't match any known pathogen. Some researchers suggested these weren't antibodies at all, but evidence of genetic modification by an unknown agency. The Vietnam War had exposed soldiers to something that was rewriting their biology. The tunnel systems used during the Vietnam War held secrets far older than the conflict. American tunnel rats reported finding chambers that predated the war by centuries, containing artifacts that shouldn't have existed. The Vietnam War had opened doorways to a hidden history. Sergeant Mike Thompson, who served as a tunnel rat during the Vietnam War, broke his silence in 2005. "We found rooms down there that weren't built by the VC, perfect spheres carved from solid rock covered in symbols that hurt to look at. The brass would evacuate everyone when we found these chambers during the Vietnam War. Special teams would go in, and whatever they found was never discussed." The tunnel systems of the Vietnam War connected to natural cave networks that descended far deeper than anyone expected. Some soldiers reported hearing machinery operating far below, in depths that should have been solid rock. Others found ventilation shafts that seemed to draw air from impossible distances. The Vietnam War had revealed an underground civilization. The most classified documents from the Vietnam War describe incidents that military science still cannot explain. In 1970, an entire Marine patrol near the DMZ experienced what can only be described as temporal displacement. The 12-man unit entered a valley during a routine Vietnam War patrol and emerged 72 hours later, convinced only 3 hours had passed. Medical examinations revealed their bodies had aged exactly 72 hours, but their watches, equipment, and even the food in their packs showed only 3 hours of degradation. More disturbing, each Marine reported identical visions during their missing time in the Vietnam War. A vast city of crystal spires, beings of pure light, and warnings about humanity's future. The Pentagon created a special unit to investigate these time anomalies during the Vietnam War. Codenamed Kronos, this unit documented over 300 similar incidents throughout the conflict. Soldiers would enter certain areas during the Vietnam War and experience time differently than those outside. Some aged years and days, others emerged from week-long patrols having aged only hours. Dr. Patricia Hawkins, who studied these Vietnam War anomalies, reached a startling conclusion. The sights weren't random. They formed a pattern, a grid of temporal distortion points across Southeast Asia. The Vietnam War was being fought on top of what appeared to be an ancient time manipulation network. By 1971, both sides in the Vietnam War were actively experimenting with consciousness-altering techniques discovered in the ancient sites. The U.S. military's project, Mindbridge, attempted to replicate the enhanced abilities reported by soldiers exposed to certain locations. During the Vietnam War, volunteers were taken to specific coordinates, identified during the Vietnam War, and subjected to combinations of electromagnetic fields, acoustic frequencies, and meditation techniques derived from captured texts. The results were immediate and terrifying. Subjects developed telepathic abilities, precognitive flashes, and in some cases, the ability to influence physical matter with thought alone. Lieutenant Colonel David Chen, who oversaw Mindbridge during the Vietnam War, later testified, "We were playing with forces we didn't understand. The ancient sites weren't just historical artifacts. They were functional devices for consciousness expansion." The Vietnam War had led us to technology that made our weapons look like stone tools. The North Vietnamese conducted similar experiments during the Vietnam War, guided by Soviet researchers and ancient texts recovered from Buddhist monasteries. Their subjects, exposed to the same sites, reported contact with non-human intelligences that claimed to have guided human evolution for millennia. The Vietnam War had become a race to unlock the secrets of consciousness itself. In 1973, at the height of the Vietnam War, a strange order came from the highest levels of the Pentagon. Artifacts recovered from specific sites in Vietnam were to be immediately transported not to U.S. facilities, but to a research station in Antarctica. The connection between the Vietnam War and the frozen continent remained classified until 2020 whistleblowers revealed that the Antarctic facility was studying connections between the Vietnam War sites and ancient structures discovered beneath the ice. The geometric patterns, construction techniques, and energy signatures matched perfectly. The Vietnam War had uncovered one node of a planetary network established by an unknown civilization. Dr. Marcus Webb, who analyzed artifacts from the Vietnam War at the Antarctic facility, made a shocking discovery. The technology we found in Vietnam was part of a global system. The Vietnam War sites were connected to similar locations in Egypt, Peru, and Antarctica. Someone had built a planetary grid for purposes we're only beginning to understand. The implications were staggering. The Vietnam War hadn't just been fought over one region's secrets, but over access to a worldwide network of ancient technology. Every artifact recovered during the Vietnam War brought humanity closer to understanding this system and potentially reactivating it. Recent genetic studies of Vietnam War veterans and their descendants have revealed anomalies that challenge our understanding of human evolution. Specific genetic markers, not present before service, appear in veterans who served in certain areas during the Vietnam War. More remarkably, these markers have been passed to their children and grandchildren. Dr. Lisa Chang, a geneticist studying Vietnam War veterans, published controversial findings. The genetic changes we're seeing aren't random mutations. They appear to be deliberate modifications, as if exposure to certain locations during the Vietnam War activated dormant DNA sequences. These veterans and their descendants show enhanced cognitive abilities, increased intuition, and in some cases, capabilities we would have called supernatural. The Vietnam War, it seems, had triggered an evolutionary leap in those exposed to the ancient sites. Children and grandchildren of certain Vietnam War veterans display abilities that set them apart: enhanced pattern recognition, electromagnetic sensitivity, and an intuitive understanding of complex systems. Some researchers believe this was intentional, that the ancient civilization had programmed these sites to trigger human evolution at specific times. The Vietnam War, with its massive movement of people through these areas, had inadvertently activated a genetic upgrade program left by our predecessors. In 2021, Russia declassified documents that shed new light on Soviet involvement in the Vietnam War's hidden aspects. The files revealed that the USSR had discovered similar sites in Siberia and had been studying them since the 20s. The Vietnam War represented an opportunity to compare findings and potentially unlock the global network. Soviet scientists during the Vietnam War reported phenomena identical to American experiences: time distortions, consciousness alterations, and contact with non-human intelligences. But the Soviets had made an additional discovery that they kept secret even from their North Vietnamese allies during the Vietnam War. According to the documents, Soviet researchers had partially decoded the operating system of the ancient technology. They learned that the sites responded to human consciousness, but only when specific genetic markers were present. The Vietnam War was unconsciously selecting and activating individuals with these markers, creating a new breed of human with enhanced capabilities. General Yuri Volkov, who oversaw Soviet paranormal research during the Vietnam War, wrote in his memoir, "The Americans thought they were fighting communism. We thought we were spreading revolution, but the Vietnam War was serving a different master, an ancient program designed to evolve humanity through conflict and exposure to the sacred sites." Following the Vietnam War, multiple corporations were founded by veterans who had been exposed to the anomalous sites. These companies, specializing in advanced technologies, achieved breakthroughs that seemed to come from nowhere. Investigation reveals a pattern connecting the Vietnam War to the modern tech revolution. Several Silicon Valley pioneers were Vietnam War veterans who served in units that encountered the ancient sites. Their innovations in computing, telecommunications, and artificial intelligence showed uncanny parallels to technologies described in recovered artifacts from the Vietnam War. Was this coincidence, or had exposure during the Vietnam War given these individuals access to advanced knowledge? Corporate records, sealed by national security orders, suggest that certain tech companies were founded specifically to reverse engineer discoveries from the Vietnam War. A former executive, speaking anonymously, revealed, "The Vietnam War didn't end in 1975. It moved into corporate boardrooms and research labs. The real prize wasn't territory but technology, and the companies that controlled it would shape the future. Every smartphone, every quantum computer, every AI system has roots in what we found during the Vietnam War." Today, satellite imagery shows increased military activity at the ancient sites discovered during the Vietnam War. Both the Vietnamese and American governments maintain restricted zones around these locations, officially for unexploded ordnance from the Vietnam War, but locals report strange lights, electromagnetic disturbances, and visits by international research teams. The children and grandchildren of Vietnam War veterans report increasing psychic experiences, shared dreams, and a compulsion to return to Southeast Asia. Online communities have formed, connecting those who feel activated by their connection to the Vietnam War. They share experiences that would have been dismissed as fantasy, but show remarkable consistency. Some researchers believe we're approaching a crucial moment predicted in the ancient texts found during the Vietnam War. The sites are becoming more active, the genetic changes more pronounced, and the veil between dimensions thinner. The Vietnam War may have been just the opening act in a drama that's about to reach its climax. Dr. Michael Roberts, who has studied the Vietnam War anomalies for 30 years, warns, "The ancient civilization left these sites as a test and a gift. The Vietnam War forced us to find them before we were ready. Now we face a choice: use this knowledge to evolve as a species, or risk destroying ourselves with power we don't understand. The Vietnam War wasn't the end, it was the beginning. As we investigate deeper into the mysteries of the Vietnam War, one question remains. Why Vietnam? Why did this ancient civilization choose this specific region to hide their most powerful technology? The answer may lie in Vietnam's unique geography, its position on planetary energy lines, or perhaps in the genetic heritage of its people. The Vietnam War, viewed through this lens, becomes something far more than a Cold War conflict. It was a cosmic event, drawing souls with ancient connections to sites of unimaginable power. Every soldier who served in the Vietnam War, every civilian who endured it, was part of a larger pattern we're only beginning to understand. The trauma of the Vietnam War may have been necessary to crack open human consciousness. To prepare humanity for revelations that would have destroyed earlier, less evolved minds. The suffering of millions during the Vietnam War served as a planetary initiation, a trial by fire that selected those capable of handling the truth about our origins and destiny. Recent expeditions to Vietnam War sites have discovered that the ancient technology is awakening. Energy readings that remained dormant for decades are now spiking. The sites seem to be responding to our current global crisis, as if the Vietnam War was merely the activation sequence for a program that's now running at full capacity. In 2023, seismic surveys of former Vietnam War battlefields revealed a vast network of artificial caverns extending throughout Southeast Asia. These weren't the tunnels dug during the Vietnam War, but massive chambers connected by passages that showed signs of advanced engineering. The Vietnam War had taken place above a hidden underground civilization. Exploration teams, equipped with technology developed from Vietnam War discoveries, have begun mapping this network. What they've found defies explanation. Vast halls filled with crystalline structures that pulse with energy, underground lakes that glow with bioluminescence, and chambers containing what appear to be suspended animation pods, some still occupied. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, leading one exploration team, reported, "The Vietnam War was fought on the surface while below. An entire civilization waited in stasis. We've found evidence that some of these beings awakened during the war, possibly triggered by the violence above. The Vietnam War may have been their alarm clock. The underground networks connect to similar systems worldwide, creating a planetary subway system built by the ancients. The Vietnam War sites were major stations on this network, which explains why control of these areas was so crucial to both sides, even if they didn't fully understand why. Ancient texts recovered during the Vietnam War spoke of a time of choosing, when humanity would face its greatest test. According to these prophecies, the Vietnam War was the beginning of this period, a violent awakening that would force our species to evolve or perish. The prophecies describe specific signs. Children born with abilities their parents lack, now documented in Vietnam War veterans' families. Technology advancing faster than wisdom, our current situation, and the return of the sky teachers, increasing UFO activity near Vietnam War sites. Every prediction made in texts thousands of years old has come to pass. Most disturbing, the prophecies warn of a final conflict that will make the Vietnam War look like a minor skirmish. This won't be a war between nations, but between those who would keep humanity enslaved in ignorance and those who would see us take our place among the stars. The Vietnam War was merely the first battle in this cosmic conflict. Veterans of the Vietnam War report increasing dreams and visions as they age. These aren't symptoms of PTSD, but appear to be delayed activation of programming received during their exposure to the ancient sites. The Vietnam War had planted seeds in their consciousness that are only now beginning to bloom. Support groups for Vietnam War veterans have become inadvertent mystery schools, as members share experiences that transcend normal reality. They speak of receiving downloads of information, sudden understanding of advanced concepts, and most remarkably, shared visions of humanity's future that match despite the veterans never having met during the Vietnam War. Dr. Thomas Anderson, who counsels Vietnam War veterans, observed, "Something was transmitted to these men during their service. The Vietnam War exposed them to frequencies, energies, or intelligences that altered their consciousness. Now, 50 years later, that programming is activating. They're becoming something new, something more than human. The most profound legacy of the Vietnam War may be the children born to those who served. These individuals, now adults, display capabilities that suggest human evolution has taken a quantum leap. They possess intuitive understanding of complex systems, natural healing abilities, and in some cases, apparent telepathic connections to others with Vietnam War ancestry. Schools in areas with high populations of Vietnam War veterans, families report unusual phenomena, children who can sense each other's emotions, students who solve problems through methods teachers don't understand, and group meditations that produce measurable electromagnetic effects. The Vietnam War had initiated a genetic upgrade that's now manifesting in the second and third generations. Sarah Mitchell, whose father served in the Vietnam War, describes her experience. "I've always known things I shouldn't know, felt connections to places I've never been. When I finally visited Vietnam, the land recognized me. I could feel the ancient sites calling, welcoming me home. The Vietnam War didn't just affect those who fought, it changed their children's destiny." When we step back and view the Vietnam War from a cosmic perspective, patterns emerge that transform our understanding of the conflict. The war wasn't random. It was precisely timed to coincide with astronomical alignments documented in ancient texts. The Vietnam War occurred during a period when Earth passed through a specific region of space, exposing the planet to cosmic energies that activated the ancient sites. Astrophysicists studying the Vietnam War period have discovered unusual solar activity, gravitational anomalies, and cosmic ray bombardments that peaked during the conflict's most intense years. The universe itself seemed to be focusing energy on Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War, using the conflict as a lens to transform human consciousness. This cosmic timing explains why the Vietnam War had such profound effects on those who participated. They weren't just soldiers in a political conflict, they were cosmic actors in a drama written in the stars, playing roles that would determine humanity's evolution. The Vietnam War was our species' final exam, and we're only now learning if we passed. Reports from Southeast Asia indicate that something is returning to the Vietnam War sites. Locals speak of lights in the sky, beings that appear and disappear, and technology activating after decades of dormancy. The ancient civilization that left these sites may be coming back to check on their experiment. Veterans of the Vietnam War describe being called to return to Vietnam, feeling an irresistible compulsion to revisit the sites where they served. Those who make the journey report profound experiences, healing of decades-old trauma, activation of latent abilities, and contact with intelligences that claim to have been waiting for their return since the Vietnam War. Is this the beginning of open contact with our ancient benefactors? Are the beings who seeded these sites throughout Southeast Asia preparing to reveal themselves? The Vietnam War may have been our initiation, and now we face graduation, or judgment. The Vietnam War was never what it seemed. It wasn't about communism versus capitalism, East versus West, or even human versus human. The Vietnam War was about humanity's encounter with its own hidden history and potential future. Every bullet fired, every bomb dropped, every life lost in the Vietnam War served a purpose we're only beginning to understand. The ancient sites activated during the Vietnam War have changed our species at a fundamental level. The genetic modifications, consciousness expansions, and technological discoveries from the Vietnam War have prepared us for a transformation that mystics and prophets have predicted for millennia. We stand at the threshold of becoming something more than human, and we owe it to the catalyst of the Vietnam War. For those who served in the Vietnam War, who lost loved ones in the conflict, who still bear its scars, know that your sacrifice was not in vain. You were participants in the most important event in human history, even if you didn't know it at the time. The Vietnam War was humanity's dark night of the soul, necessary for our species' dawn. The sites remain active, the technology waits, the beings watch, and somewhere in the jungles of Southeast Asia, in chambers that have kept their secrets since before human history, answers await those brave enough to seek them. The Vietnam War opened the door. Now we must decide whether to walk through it. What do you believe about the Vietnam War now? Can you see past the official history to the cosmic truth? Are you ready to accept that everything you were taught about the Vietnam War was a cover story for humanity's most important encounter with its own destiny? The Vietnam War ended in 1975, or did it? Perhaps the real war. The war for human consciousness, for our species' evolution, for our place in the cosmos, has just begun. And every one of us, especially those touched by the Vietnam War, are soldiers in this greater conflict. The choice is yours. Dismiss this as fantasy, or open your mind to the possibility that the Vietnam War was the most important event in human history. Because if even a fraction of this is true, then everything changes. Everything. What do you believe?